The Colt pistol struck the table with a dry, cold sound, colder than the wind seeping through the cracks in the wooden floorboards. The young man stood there, his coat covered in dust, his eyes red from many sleepless nights. His gun barrel was pointed directly at the forehead of the old man sitting beside his coffee cup. The old man didn't raise his hand. He didn't move his chair. He didn't call for help. He only stirred his coffee one more time, so slowly that the whole room seemed to hold its breath with the tin spoon. "Son," he whispered, his eyes never leaving the gun, "if you intend to kill me, don't spill the coffee." No one laughed. A card fell from the hand of the gambler at the next table. The bartender stood frozen behind the counter. Outside, a horse neighed and then fell silent, as if it too sensed something was about to break. Owen Flint squeezed the trigger. 4 years he had ridden through dust, snow, and blood to find this man. For 4 years he carried his brother's name like a knife in his chest. Nate Flint had died at the hands of Elias Ward, and Owen had sworn to make the old man pay. But Elias Ward didn't seem afraid of death. He seemed like someone who had lived with death for so long that he no longer trembled at it. "You killed my brother," Owen said, his voice low as the grinding of stones under wheels. "Today, I have justice." From the doorway, a woman's voice rang out, soft but sharp enough to make the gun freeze. "If you call that justice..." Rose Carter set the sack down on the floor, her eyes fixed on Owen's face. "Then you should know your brother died after my father fell in a pool of blood." Owen didn't turn immediately, but the gun barrel was half an inch from Elias's forehead. And in that silence, the whole room understood that someone who had just come to kill might be about to hear a truth he couldn't bear to live with. Rose Carter didn't step further into the saloon. She stood in the doorway, one hand still gripping the handle of the sack, the other resting loosely on the side of her dress as if to keep herself from trembling. Owen Flint turned his head very slowly. In his eyes there was still the fire of revenge, but Rose's words had thrown something else into it. Suspicion. It was a small thing, but enough to make his finger slip from the trigger. Elias Ward saw it. He didn't smile. He didn't breathe a sigh of relief. He simply set his spoon down beside his coffee cup, like someone who knows the bullet has been delayed, not actually gone. "What did you just say?" Owen asked. Rose took another step forward. The wooden floorboards creaked under her feet. "I said my father died the night your brother rode with Wade Crow." The name made several people in the bar lower their heads. The bartender turned away to wipe a clean glass. Sheriff Ben Moss appeared in the back door, his hand near his holster, but he didn't draw it. Owen looked at each face in the room. No one contradicted Rose. No one looked him straight in the eye. "Nate isn't the killer," Owen said, but his voice was no longer as firm as when he had placed the gun on the table. Rose picked up the sack of goods. "Then you should come with me to Carter Creek. See the land that Flint left us." The wind in the street blew dust through their feet as Rose walked ahead. Owen followed, and Elias lagged behind, like an old shadow all too familiar with burials. Carter Creek Ranch appeared under the gray sky. The wooden fence swayed in the wind. The creek was almost dry, only a few dark streaks of water remaining on the rocks. Further on was the crossing, narrow, low, and vital to all the cattle in the area. Rose stopped at the gate. "My father kept this crossing for the small ranchers," she said. "He died for refusing to sell it." Before Owen could reply, a young ranch hand ran up, his face pale. "Miss Rose, the north fence has been cut. The cattle tracks are heading toward the crossing." Rose spun around, and Owen, for the first time since arriving in Bitter Creek, forgot who his gun was aimed at. Rose Carter didn't run. She walked, quickly, so quickly that her dress brushed against the dry grass like fire licking straw. Owen followed her, his hand still near his Colt, but this time he didn't know who he was about to shoot. Elias Ward and Sheriff Ben Moss walked a few paces behind them, silent, as if they had sensed trouble before they saw it. The north fence had been neatly cut with steel pliers. Not cattle, not wind. 3 strands of wire lay bent on the ground, the cut ends gleaming white in the early morning sun. Rose knelt down, touching the cut. Her hands were dusty, but her voice didn't tremble. They didn't want a few cattle, she said. They wanted to see how long we'd stay awake before collapsing. Owen looked down at the dry ground. Cattle hoof prints stretched in a wide streak, leading toward the shallow creek bed. Between them were horse tracks. One hoof was hoofed askew to the left, creating a small slant in the soft ground. He paused. 4 years ago, he'd seen those hoof prints outside an abandoned camp where Nate Flint disappeared 3 days before he died. Who rides a horse with hoof prints like that? Owen asked. Rose turned to look at him. Wade Crow. The name fell between them like a coin placed on the eye of a dead man. Elias approached the prince, bending down slowly. He still liked to let people know he'd been here, he said. Not enough to accuse, just enough to keep people awake at night. Bitter Creek Crossing lay before them, low and narrow, sandwiched between 2 cracked banks. During the high water season, it was only a temporary crossing. But in the dry season, every herd of cattle wanting to leave the area had to use it. Rose stood up, her eyes fixed on the crossing as if a stranger were tampering with the lock on her own door. If he controls this place, she said, every small ranch around Bitter Creek will have to ask his permission to live. Owen didn't answer. He just looked at the hoof prints on the ground, then at Rose.
For the first time, Nate Flint's death didn't stand alone in the past. It had horse tracks. It had a name, and it was returning to this land.
Night fell over Carter Creek Ranch in a cold gray. No one mentioned dinner. Rose hammered the fence posts, each blow to the dry wood as if she were trying to bury her fear deep within the earth. Owen stood beside her, silently holding the crossbar for her. She didn't thank me. I didn't expect thanks either. The wind blew across the shallow creek, carrying the smell of dust, cow dung, and rotting wood. In the distance, the cattle huddled together in a dark mass under the crescent moon, uneasy as if they too knew a strange hand had just touched the ranch's lifeline. In the small kitchen, the oil lamp burned low. Elias Ward sat at the head of the table, his hat in front of him, his old hands clasped together. Sheriff Ben Moss stood near the door, and Rose leaned against the sink, not looking at Owen. Owen set the Colt down on the table. "Tell me everything," he said. "Don't tell me half the truth, and then expect me to bury the rest myself." Elias looked at the gun, then at Owen. "Nate was riding with Wade Crow the night Rose's father died," he said slowly. "They didn't come just to steal money. They wanted the Carter family's crossing papers." Rose closed her eyes, but she didn't leave the room. Elias continued, his voice low as a landslide in the darkness. "Her father resisted. Wade fired first. Nate panicked. He wasn't the mastermind, but he stood there, gun in hand, when a father fell to the floor." Owen swallowed hard. His throat felt like it was made of sand. "You killed him." "I shot Nate when he turned his gun on me," Elias replied. "If we had been a beat slower, another person would have been taken to the graveyard that night." Rose walked to the low cabinet and took out a worn-edged, leather-bound notebook. She placed it in front of Owen. "My father recorded everything through crossing," she said. "Wade Crow's name is in there, including the debts he never paid." Owen opened the notebook. Between the old ink lines, he saw Wade's name, and next to it, a hand-drawn, slanted claw mark. Outside the barn, a horse neighed. Then a gunshot ripped through the night. A second shot rang out before anyone could stand. The oil lamp flickered violently on the table. Rose grabbed the shotgun hanging by the kitchen door, and Owen instinctively picked up his Colt. But as he dashed out onto the porch, the darkness before him was empty. Only the bellowing of cattle from the corral to the east and the swirling white dust in the moonlight. "They're not aiming at the house," Elias said behind him. "They're aiming at the cattle." Rose ran ahead. A section of corral had come loose from its stake. The cattle, panicked, huddled together, horns striking wood, hooves digging into the dry ground. An old cow lay near the gate, its hind leg broken and twisted beneath its body, its breath coming in ragged gasps of pain. Rose stopped dead in her tracks. For a very brief moment, she was no longer the ranch keeper, no longer the girl who had once defied Wade Crow with clenched teeth. She was simply a woman who saw what she had nurtured through the drought transformed into a warning. Owen stepped forward. "Let me." Rose shook her head. She raised the shotgun, her eyes red but not shedding tears. The gunshot was low and heavy. Then the cow fell silent. No one said anything. The next morning, a few small ranchers came to Carter Creek. They looked at the cut fence, the broken corral, and then at Owen as if he were a living omen. "You left a Flint here?" an old man growled. "Isn't your father dead enough, Rose?" Owen stepped back behind the porch post. He could take a bullet more easily than that look. Rose didn't turn to defend him. Neither did she chase him away. "I need someone who can read horse tracks," she said. "And I need to keep the crossing." The crowd fell silent, but that silence wasn't agreement. It was a warning. As they left, a boy from the South Ranch rode up on horseback, holding a piece of paper pinned to the gate. Rose opened it. There was only one line of black writing. "Sell crossing before the full moon. Next time, not just cattle fall." Rose didn't read the words a second time. She folded the piece of paper, but her hand tightened so much that the edges crumpled in her palm. Only 2 nights left until the full moon. For Wade Crow, it wasn't a threat. It was a date. That night, the Carter Creek kitchen was lit by a low oil lamp. The wind rattled against the wooden walls. On the table lay Rose's father's leather-bound notebook, an old letter from Nate Flint, and Owen's Colt, more out of reach than usual. Rose flipped through the pages of the notebook. The ink had faded, but the numbers were still clear. Crossing fees, names of small ranches, number of cattle that passed, Wade Crow's debt, and a hastily written entry before her father's death. "Brand altered," Rose read softly. 37 cattle. Crow's mark burned over Carter's. Owen stood by the window, his face hidden in the shadows. He took a crumpled letter from his inner pocket. "Nate sent me this before he died," he said. "I kept it for 4 years, but never had the courage to read it again." Elisa Ward looked at him without urging him. Owen opened the letter. His voice was hoarse as he read the last line. "One last thing, Owen. Then you'll have the money to buy land. Wade said no one would get hurt if everyone knew what to do." No one in the kitchen breathed heavily. Rose looked at the letter, then at her father's notebook. 2 old pieces of paper, 2 seemingly unrelated panes, now fit together like 2 jaws of a trap. Nate Flint didn't die from Elias's pursuit. He died because he followed Wade Crow into something he thought he could never turn back from. Owen closed his eyes. For the first time, he didn't defend his brother. He only asked softly, "Does anyone else know about this?" Sheriff Ben Moss entered just then, his hat damp with dew in his hand. "Yes," he said. "Someone saw Wade that night, but he's planning to leave town before dawn." Rose stood up. Owen picked up the Colt. Elias looked at them both and said, "If we let him go, Wade Crow won't need to fire another shot. The shack was on the edge of town, low and dilapidated, as if a strong gust of wind would be enough to sweep it down into the dry creek bed. Rose walked ahead, shotgun hidden under her cloak. Owen followed closely to her left. Elias Ward walked slower behind, one hand near the holster, but his face no longer held the calm expression of the man who had sat with his morning coffee. The man inside was Jonah Price. He had been tending Wade Crow's horses the night Rose's father died. When the door opened, Jonah had finished tying his luggage. His eyes were red from lack of sleep. "I don't want to die because of the Carters anymore," he said. Rose stood still, her jaw clenched. "My father didn't want to die either." That statement made Jonah lower his head. He trembled as he recounted that Wade Crow had shot Rose's father first. Nate Flint had panicked, but still stood with them, gun in hand. Then Wade left Nate to take the blame when Elias Ward arrived. Owen listened to each word as if the ground were collapsing beneath his feet. 4 years of hatred hadn't disappeared. It had only changed direction, more dangerous, sharper, and more shameful. Elias placed a piece of paper on the table. "Sign it. Sheriff Ben will take you back to town." Jonah picked up the pen. The sound of shattering glass rang out before the pen touched the paper. The first shot knocked Jonah off his chair. The second lodged in the wooden wall next to Rose. Owen pulled her to the floor while Elias rushed to the door, older than everyone else in the room, but still the first to stand in the crossfire. "Get behind!" Elias yelled. Rose crawled toward Jonah, but blood had already stained his shirt. His dying testimony came with his last breath. Outside, one of Wade's men on horseback charged, trying to drag Rose through the broken window. Owen drew his Colt. You could shoot him straight in the chest. But Rose screamed, "He needs to live!" Owen gritted his teeth, lowered the barrel an inch, and pulled the trigger. The bullet knocked the gun out of the man's hand. When the dust settled, Elias collapsed beside the window frame, blood flowing from his shoulder. Rose looked at Owen, seeing for the first time more than just the Flint surname. Owen understood perfectly. From that moment on, Wade Crow wouldn't let him leave Bitter Creek alive. The night before the full moon was silent. There were no songs, no prayers for good luck, no one pretending that everything would be all right the next morning. Carter Creek Ranch was lit by a few weak oil lamps. Rose had the cattle herded into the innermost corral. Sheriff Ben Moss checked the south gate. Owen walked along the fence, tightening each section of rope, hammering in each bolt, as if each nail a promise he hadn't dared to make. Inside the barn, Elias Ward sat on a wooden crate, his shoulders wrapped in a white cloth stained red. He was no longer strong enough to lead the herd, but his eyes were still as sharp as old blades. "Wade won't attack directly," Elias said. "He'll drive the cattle across. Once the cattle run, you won't hear the gunfire. You won't see who betrayed whom." Rose spread her father's hand-drawn map on the table. Old pencil lines indicated the creek, the side gate, the low rocky bank, and the soft ground where the cattle would easily stumble. "If I can close the side gate before they cross," she said, "the cattle will be trapped in the middle of the creek." Owen looked at her. "You have to ride around to the south bank. There's no cover out there." Rose folded the map. "I know. No one told you not to go. At Bitter Creek, you can't hold land by standing behind a door." Near midnight, Rose met Owen by the dry well. The wind blew her hair against her cheek. She offered him a clean cloth. "Your hand is bleeding," she said. Owen looked down, only then realizing his palm was torn from pulling the wire. "I used to think that if I could kill Elias, I would know how to live on," he said. Rose didn't look at him. And now he wrapped the cloth around his hand, his voice low. Now I just know I don't want Wade to take anything more from you." Rose was silent for a long time. Then the small bell hanging at the crossing gate rang once. Not the wind. Owen held the Winchester. Rose blew out the lamp. From inside the barn, Elias whispered, "He's here." The first figure slithered out from the edge of the creek like a black ink streak in the moonlight. Then the second, the third. Not pedestrians, horses. Behind them, the cattle were spurred to life in panic, their hooves pounding the dry ground like thunder buried beneath the rocks. Wade Crow didn't attack the house. He attacked what kept the house alive. "They're driving the herd out the crossing," Sheriff Ben shouted. Rose mounted her horse before the shouts died down. She spurred her horse around to the south bank, where the narrow path was only wide enough for one rider between the swirling bushes and loose rocks. If she could close the side gate, the cattle would be trapped in the creek. If she had been a beat slower, Wade would have taken half of Carter's fortune in the night. Owen lifted Winchester from the edge of the broken corral. He saw gunfire moving through the dust, heard the clanging of metal, the bellowing of cattle, the cracking of wood under the pressure of hundreds of hooves. A shot flashed from the rocky bank. The bullet lodged in the wooden post right next to Rose. Owen returned fire, not aiming at the man's chest, but at the rock in front of his horse. The horse reared up, and the rider fell to the ground. From across the crossing, Wade Crow laughed loudly. "You've got a soft shot, Flint. Nate would be ashamed if he were still alive." That name struck Owen harder than any bullet. For a moment, his gun barrel found Wade clearly in the moonlight dust. Just one shot, and 4 years of hatred would have a place to rest. But down in the creek, Rose was struggling with the jammed gate, one hand pulling the rope, the other holding the horse back. Wade saw her too. He turned his gun toward Rose. Elias Ward, his shoulder still bleeding, stepped out of the barn shadow and fired a shot into the air to draw Wade back. Wade fired. Elias fell beside the crossing post. Owen pulled the trigger. The bullet didn't kill Wade. It knocked the gun out of his hand, leaving a metallic clang on the cold stone. At the same time, Rose pulled the gate shut. The cattle herded into the creek, dust rising and obscuring the moonlight. When the bellowing subsided, Carter Creek Ranch still stood, but Elias lay motionless in the dust, and behind Rose, the barn began to burn. By the time dawn crept across the gray grass, Carter Creek Ranch was still standing, but it was no longer the ranch of the night before. Half the barn was charred black, the smell of smoke clinging to the wooden planks, to the hair, to the clothes, to the very breath of the survivors. The eastern corral had collapsed into broken pieces of wood. Several cattle had vanished into the darkness. The remaining ones stood scattered along the creek bed, silent as if they too knew they had just passed through a judgment. Wade Crow sat with his hands bound behind his back at the foot of the gatepost. Blood flowed from his wrists, but his eyes were still filled with hatred. Sheriff Ben Moss picked up Wade's gun from the stone pavement and looked at Rose. "Your father's notebook and the testimony of the survivors will be enough to bring him to trial." Rose didn't answer immediately. She looked towards the half-burned barn where her father used to hang his old saddle. Keeping the crossing wouldn't bring the dead back. Justice couldn't rebuild wood that had burned in a single night. Owen stood a few steps away from her, his face covered in dust and smoke, his Winchester rifle hanging low at his side. He didn't look at Wade, he looked at Elias Ward. The old man was still breathing, but his right arm was bound in blood-soaked cloth. The man who used to stir coffee in front of a gun was now leaning against the crossing post, 10 years older. Overnight, Elias opened his eyes as Owen knelt beside him. "I could have killed him," Owen said softly. Elias looked at him for a long time. "Yes, And then he would have taken the rest of you. No one said anything more. At noon, Owen walked out to the small cemetery behind the ranch. He placed Nate's letter down in front of Rose's father's grave, letting the wind rustle the worn edges of the paper. Rose stood behind him, unforgiving. But she didn't tell him to leave either. As evening fell, she placed 2 cups of coffee on the patio table, one for herself, one in front of where Owen stood. Owen untied the sling for his gun from his thigh, placing the Colt on the table. Rose looked toward the charred crossing gate. "If you stay," she said, "don't stay because of me. Stay because you know this place is worth keeping." Owen looked at the broken gate, then picked up the hammer. "Then I'll start with the gate." The first hammer blow echoed in the fading afternoon, slow, heavy, and more real than any promise. Thank you for following the story to the very end. If Owen, Rose, and Bitter Creek Crossing's journey resonates with you, evoking feelings of honor, loss, and the chance for a new lease on life, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. More Wild West stories await you at the end of the dusty red road.